Right, we are live. Hi there, cam followers. It's lovely to have you here this evening. We are joined by Jenny, who's going to be talking to us about veterinary mediation. Just before we go into that, I'm just going to again go back to Big Barker, who have been incredibly helpful and supportive of Cam right from the beginning. They are fantastic brand that are making these fantastic beds. A few of our team have these beds and can rave about them themselves, and they're actually making a big effort into clinically proving these are really effective in helping our animals, particularly with orthotic problems. So yeah, check them out. That's our Big Barker. Great. Right, I'm joined by Jenny. I will let her introduce herself, and then we'll get right in and have a chat about what's going on.
Lovely, thanks Charlotte. Hi everyone. First of all, apologies, I've got a really annoying cough at the moment, so just be grateful you're not in the same room as me, but I apologise if I'm spluttering through the chat this evening. But it's great to be here. We've done previous Cam Live events, and it's really great, I think, to share what we're doing, some of the insight we see at the VCMS, but just to answer questions and pick up on really any of the work we do in trying to support the client and practice relationship. So that really important relationship between owners and the practice team. So my background is a solicitor, but I really focus on alternative dispute resolution. So rather than fighting it out at court, very much about how do we find some common ground and find a way of dealing with disputes and conflict in a more collaborative and forward-looking way. So that's very much sort of where I come from. When we're looking at any tensions and issues in within practices. What I really love about doing mediation is because you get to the heart of perhaps why a complaint has arisen and what's gone on. You get to see it from both sides, and you get to hear different perspectives on what's gone on, and that gives you a really unique sort of really view of where we've got to, how we've got to this point. But then importantly, being able to share that insight and feed it back. So giving owners some guidance on how they can prepare for consults, and how they can also deal with, if they've got worries or grumbles, how they can raise that constructively. But then also for practices, just to start to think, how can I stand in the owner and the client's shoes and get a feel for really how it is on their side and what their experience is, so we can try and bring both together, because ultimately everyone's working for the best interests of the animal, and they want the best decisions to be made for the animal and for their care. So at VCMS, we are a telephone mediation service. We're funded by the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, really with the aim of bringing together both owners and practice teams if there has been a complaint, if there's a bit of a grumble and it's escalating. So we will get involved if the complaint process within the practice hasn't really worked or hasn't been able to get a resolution and put things to bed. So we come in as an impartial and independent third party, and we basically ask both the owner and the practice, right, what's happened, why are we here? We then will use mediation techniques to try and find some common ground and a way forward, because ultimately we want to get to a point where that issue is resolved and the relationship can continue, or if they are going to part ways, that both the vet doesn't have a really difficult experience with that, and that the owner still has trust and confidence in veterinary professionals and will then go into their next relationship kind of in a with a more positive mindset about it. So it's a really emotive area, because we love our animals so much, and we rely really heavily on that relationship between the two. It's about dialogue, it's about the sharing of information and then making decisions. So any emotion that comes into that is only going to be heightened when, particularly, either we're making either financially costly decisions, but also emotionally costly ones. What are we looking at in terms of longer term management of a chronic condition, or are we talking sort of end of life situations? So there's often a lot of emotion that goes into it, and what we do at the VCMS is trying to diffuse some of that, so that we can then get to the heart of really what's gone on and what we can do to resolve it. So we don't impose any decisions. We're not here to judge what's happened, who's right and who's wrong, but very much about making sure both the vet and the owner feel heard, that all their issues, and sometimes it's about a misunderstanding, and actually we can then bring everyone back onto the same page. Other times it's about actually getting to the heart of the issue, which might not have been sort of grappled until that point. We see a real mixed bag of issues, some very sort of consumer related in terms of perhaps charges and invoices, right through to I don't think the care that my animal has received has been competent. So it gets, sort of really, really emotive at that stage. The last 2 years have been incredibly busy for us, because I think we have seen huge increase in pet ownership. So that has obviously then fed into interactions in practice. We've also seen real challenges in communication because of social distancing and all the measures we had to put in place to keep each other safe. That's made it harder to have a lot of these discussions around, both, I think, getting from owners exactly what's been going on, but then also sharing information with owners and helping them to make a decision. That's been very difficult in car parks, particularly on snowy, dark evenings. That's been really difficult. And we've also seen, real pressures in practices with sort of staff shortages, etc. So that's led to an increase in complaints coming through. Talking to practices across the country, I think it's something that's been commonly experienced. So we've seen a 30% increase in complaints coming through, and we've done 40% more mediations in the last year than we did in previous years. Now, I think that's just a mark really of the difficulties we've all faced and the tensions we've faced. It's the same in other sectors, so it's not unique to veterinary. But I think it has been, it's been a tough slog for everyone, tough for owners, tough for practices as well, and we've seen that. But the great thing about mediation is you're giving people the power and the options to find their own resolution, because we don't impose it, we'll help them find it. What we hope is, although we've been busier, actually, that we've helped more people to find a way through these, perhaps a difficulty, and then come out the other side of it. And that's been incredibly difficult for practices as well. So a lot of the insight we've been sharing has been around how we can try to reset communication now we're coming out of the pandemic, how we get back to, the things we've always done during a consult, sort of showing an owner what you're doing and how you're examining, the way we talk to each other over the top of that examination. As owners, we're trying to share all the information that we've got and the worries we have. And for the practice team, it's also then their chance to start talking through, what am I thinking, what path might we go down, and what are the options. So just how do we get back to a bit of normality and that proximity with one another, that we can then pick up on more the subtleties of how we communicate. So it's been busy, but I do think that hopefully we're looking more now at living with this situation and evolving, sort of going forward with it. So that's really, in terms of how you use the service, how you contact us, it's free at the point of use. People can phone us. There's an online form. I'll put details up later on around our sort of contact points, but vetmediation.co.uk is the website. And we just encourage owners and practices, if they need to just get in touch if they feel that there's an issue or a complaint that's escalating, just to get in touch with us, and we'll see if we can then get involved and help from there. I mentioned obviously that unique perspective we get in mediation, and I thought what might be useful this evening is just to have a chat through really perhaps how mediation techniques can help both the owner and the practice get a bit more out of those consults, and make sure that they're really effective and everyone leaves really where they want to be, rather than perhaps with some niggling queries or things they haven't asked. Because I think a lot of about probably a third of the complaints we deal with are relating to diagnostic issues. So either where our owner thinks a condition could have been diagnosed earlier, or a wrong diagnosis was made. Actually, when we mediate those, it's not really about the clinical decision making on the pathway. It's very much about the communication and everyone's expectation, and how we got to that point. So anything we can share, just I think to help both owners and practices to really get to the nub of the communication and deal with it, I think is it will hopefully be of use both to owners and to practice teams. And I know a lot of the work CAM does is really important at trying to bring those two together to work collaboratively. Yeah. So
it's definitely one of these chronic issues. This the thing. This is not you go, you get fixed, and you go home. It's unfortunately one of those things where that communication has to go on. This helps bring it all together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I looked back through the data that we have around complaints, mainly focusing on sort of arthritic conditions, but looking at some of the chronic conditions. And most of the ones we see are around either, as I say, that wrong diagnosis, that a client feels that perhaps we could have got the right diagnosis earlier, or where perhaps they feel that the condition was attributed to something else, and actually if we'd got to that point sooner, then effective treatment could be in place and we could be having decision making with probably on the right along the correct lines. But I think what comes out to us when we're looking at those complaints is often it's about understanding what diagnostic tests, what options are out there, why we're doing what we're doing, and what those tests can tell us. Because I think it's important for owners to have an understanding of, well, we're doing this test, or we're going to observe, and we're looking for these symptoms, etc., and that will help us to give you a diagnosis. If a client doesn't know necessarily what the blood test is going to tell them or not tell them, then their expectations of that pathway are, they might be quite high or they're quite low. But actually, how can we cut through all of that and make sure that everyone's on the same page and they know why we're doing something and when's the right time to do that? Because some owners will rightly be expecting certain steps to be taken, but that might not be the right time for that. So we're often trying to align the clinical decision making then with expectations and understanding. The other issue that we see will obviously arise when there's a insurance claim being submitted and there might be a pre-existing symptom or issue which then affects cover going forward, and we will often be involved in mediating complaints where it may be something historic is on the record, which then the insurer will focus on and then refuse to provide cover. So they're often around getting the practice and the owner to work together to explain that to the insurance company, or where we again can try and look at what has been noted and how that can how that will have an impact on the insurance situation, and possibly try and refer it back to the insurance and the financial ombudsman rather than it being the vet issue, because often that's more of an insurance cover sort of situation. So they're largely what we see. We obviously see issues where it may be that a chronic condition's been diagnosed and actually there's something else that's going on, and that gets identified. But in terms of managing chronic conditions, it's largely around, I think, it being a collaborative decision-making process about what we do going forward. So we get the diagnosis and then actually how we're going to manage this, what's right for that particular animal, what's right for the owner, and the trust and the confidence in the practice team to try and bring that together so that we get a plan that everyone's on board with, they agree. We can't own and manage and control the outcome, but what we can do is make sure that when we're on when we've agreed a plan, everyone's on board with it, and actually we know, and if there are any concerns and worries about it, that the owner and the practice have a really good relationship and they can have a very open dialogue about that, and owners feel able to ask questions and to say, well, what about this, or I'm a bit worried about that, and then air that at the time rather than it coming out after the event and then it being a complaint rather than it being a discussion at that point. A lot of I think the communication angle comes into making sure that we've got everyone on board and on the same page and working together, because I think that's where we will see feedback where clients will say, well, I didn't understand and I didn't think I could ask, I didn't feel I could ask, I didn't think there was time to ask, or I don't really feel like I made the decision. And I think it's about, again, it being a two-way relationship. So owners feeling that they have that the ability to ask, that they can ask those questions. Practice is opening up that space so that within the consult those questions can be asked, but also looking at ways for questions to be asked and answered outside of the consult. So flagging up resources like the CAM library and the huge range of sort of supportive resources and explanations that are there, and really just opening up, making clients feel comfortable in asking those questions, and just voicing it. So certainly it's the working together, it's moving it from a I'm saying this is what we should do to we can do, and how we move it into that space really. So when we're looking at decision making, certainly from a mediation perspective, we're looking at, does everyone understand what we're doing? So, when I say we, practice, the vet and the owner, has everyone got an agreed understanding of what we're doing, why we're doing it, what are they worried about, and getting people to open up and share that, what they're expecting to happen. And then also, I think from an owner perspective, we don't always know what we should be worried about or what might be coming. So how can the practice team start to prepare the owner or flag up things that they probably should be starting to think about? And that does involve a little bit of flex, because we're all different. We don't all fit into neat boxes, and some owners will need lots more information. Others will want more of a steer, and to be told sort of, well, this is the path you should be taking, but actually it has to be a combined decision making process. So we've got to look at how best we can do that. We talk in mediation about an iceberg. So you have sitting above the surface, things that are quite obvious, the things we're saying that we're worried about, or the things that are just so obvious they come and they sort of hit you in the forehead. They'll also have the current experience. What's the client presenting with? What current stage is the animal at? You've got then underneath that the huge under the water element of the iceberg, the bit that comes and gets the Titanic, which is all around the personalities involved, both the vet, but also then the owner, what they need from this situation, what is it they're not saying, and is that either because they're taking a particular stance and they don't want to share something, or is it something subconscious that they're not mentioning? Is there a particular need that they've not shared with you, or what are the emotional aspects that are driving this? Is there some fear? Is there guilt that perhaps this has been going on a little while, and this is the point at which there's a diagnosis? And I think as owners, it's being aware ourselves that we've got these emotions at play and acknowledging them, and sometimes voicing, I'm afraid of this, or I'm feeling bad. We often try and transfer that to the other person involved, and so that's when we can get a conflict situation. And we also don't know other people's previous experience. So if as an owner, perhaps you've been there with another animal, and a different practice, you may well have expectations of what's going to be done and what's going to happen. So anything we can do to make sure we haven't got sort of one side of the table talking in dog language and barking, and the other side meowing back. It's how do we bring all these together and understand really what's going on. And we use, when we're looking at complaint resolution, and we look at, we've got an acronym AERO, so acknowledging, exploring, reassuring, and then owning what's gone on. And I can share this this after, but that AERO is really useful in terms of sort of looking at how do we start to open up the conversation and the dialogue, and getting to a point where any fears or emotional sort of barriers stop us from listening to one another and understanding what's going on. So we're looking at actually just connecting as people. So ultimately, we've got two people in a room talking, or if you've got other members of the family there, but how do we be more mindful of how we communicate with one another? And we do need a degree of empathy to enable that communication to flow, and that's on both sides, both from the practice, but also then the owner towards the vet, and just our eye contact, our tone, how in the room we are, body language. I think about, it's not what we say really, it's often how we say it, and that I think the research shows us it's something like 7% of our effectiveness when we communicate is what the words we use. The rest of it is all around our tone and our body language. So just being mindful of how we will project ourselves when we're in that consult room. If we're looking very defensive and eyebrows down, maybe that there's a whole host of stuff going on inside, but that's going to impact on how the other person communicates with us. So a lot of it is about how we can be compassionate towards one another and open up that conversation. And it does feel, there's different knowledge in the room. You've got an owner who will know their animal incredibly well, and you then have veterinary professionals who, will have the clinical expertise. Actually, how do we make sure that they can communicate with one another really clearly and really effectively in the sort of the course of the discussions? I think it's also acknowledging that assumptions will get in the way. Sometimes we will make assumptions about either what we're talking about, what people understand, what a diagnosis actually means, and that will, particularly in that early phase of the sort of a chronic condition management, you've got then really to understand where the client's coming from in terms of, do they think this is the end of the world, or are they sort of understand that there are options here, and this is about quality of life or management? So where is the owner at that point? And again, owners recognizing that, I need to stop making assumptions either based on human experience or just what we assume to be the case. And how do we open up to actually hear what's being said to us about, this is where we go from here. This is the next step on this pathway, and we're looking to flush out those misunderstandings, and also just acknowledge, I think, that the situation will change in chronic condition management. The conversation you have early doors doesn't set in stone a pathway that's going to continue. So you have to keep that conversation going, and not feel that by sharing it, perhaps your view, your perspective on something has changed, is in any way a criticism of the pathway or the treatment plan. It may be just that you set a plan in place, and either from a cost or also just a practicalities situation that may have changed, and that can be very hard for owners to acknowledge and share that very openly. When we're looking at it from a practice point of view, I think it's often about opening that space for owners to share, and the assumptions therefore on, well, you've come in, this is a check and a review, and then we're just going to carry on. Actually, how do we open up that space for owners to share if things have changed? Lots of open questions, sort of those neutral probing ones about, just tell me a bit more about that, or can you explain to me sort of where we are here? Have I got this? Just talk me through, how things are at the moment. We've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, and I think it's certainly a mediation. That's really the analogy, that we need to really listen to each other to pick up on the clues, because often there'll be something that may be a throwaway comment that will really give us the nugget to unlock and go, oh, actually, I kind of know now where the other person is coming from, and be able to explore that. So from the vet perspective, I think it's about creating that space as best you can in the confines of a consult, but to get that, to open up that information. From an owner's point of view, I think it's about, before you go into the consult, having a think about what your worries and concerns are. And we're all incredibly busy, and we often pitch up either side of work, or with family in tow, lots of other places to be, etc. But actually, do we need a bit more time? Do we need to be able to try and create the space for us to really understand what's going on? And I think anything we can do to prepare owners, or to, as I say, share that information, share any resources with them, so that they can go away and reflect, and then perhaps come back and ask further questions is really important. And I'll often have conversations with vets around, well, how do I build the time for that into the consult? And I think it is around how much can you do, preparatory work? Is it about breaking and then coming back at the next point to say, right, now you've had a chance to think about this, any queries, how did that sound to you, what's you probably talked about it at home, any questions, any worries, and looking for any of those amber warnings. If anything's niggling away to an owner, how you get them to voice that. I do think I love a list. I really do. And I think we'll often say to owners, oh, I've got all these questions that I want to ask. It doesn't have to wait for a complaint for you to list out all the things you want to know. Have that conversation. And if it helps to take that in with you, or even just say, look, I might have some questions later. Is it all right if I email them in? Now, we've got to appreciate at the moment, practices are incredibly busy, and I think the will be there to respond, but sometimes the time scale may be a little bit tricky at the moment. But I think if you ask the question, someone will really try to come back to you. So I think if you do, rather than pondering and allowing something to fester, open that up and at least get the conversation going. But I think an email or a list of the questions you've got, really important to take those in with you. And I think also reflecting on why you're making the decision you're making from an owner's perspective is really, really important. Because what we'll hear in mediation is, well, yes, I made that decision at the time, but I was caught up in the emotion. I'm now looking back 6 months later or 2 years later, and I'm not sure that I made the right decision. And then they will look to the practice. They'll sort of say, well, you should have stopped me making that decision, or you should have guided me in a certain way. So I think just reflecting on why we're making the decisions we're making. Is it because I feel I should? Am I not quite ready yet to take that next step or that next decision? What have I understood? What have I taken on board? And I think this is where, from a practice point of view, if you think a client is taking a slightly off-piste decision, it's worth just reflecting on what they've based that on. And is that for a misunderstanding? Is it because they don't think there are other options? Are we focusing very much on just keeping the pet with us rather than quality of life? But then equally, have we understood what treatment will look like, what their quality of life will be? So have we made a quick decision, but actually we need to take on board a bit more context? Head over heart and hearts over heads often will come into play, particularly when we're talking over long-term care plans, and the cost and the reality of what it involves. But again, making sure that we really understand what's involved before we think, oh, this is going to be 3 years of X. Actually talking through the vet, what does that look like, and what's it going to look like in a year's time and 18 months time, so that we feel we're best placed to make a decision that's going to work for my family, my animal, and then make sure it's a real sort of a holistic decision. And I think when we're looking at longer term and chronic pain management, the reflections from the complaints that we've mediated have largely been around making sure owners understand what is available, what the options are, what we can achieve by that as well, because I think it's weighing up sometimes what we can do, what we should do, but that being from a very honest and realistic perspective, and also getting clients to think about their own lives and their own setup. And often there will be lots of either support or different pathways that are available to them, which mean that perhaps a binary decision A or B actually is, that's only a very quick snapshot. There may be 10 options that we can look at that may be right for that particular family. So I think it's really about making sure that we're looking to understand one another, not just to be understood ourselves. So are we in the same room? Have I taken on board all the information? Do I feel able to have an open conversation with one another? And how we get that going. Picking up on clues, terminology is something that comes up time and time again in mediation. We will often mediate where an owner has taken away an understanding of a particular word, and when we actually get to the heart of it, you realise that we're on different pages. We might be talking a completely different language. So I think the use of terminology, clinical terms, really important that we're precise, but also that we make sure everyone understands. I mean, not so much in chronic conditions, but certainly any sort of biopsy and the diagnostic side there, time and time again, we're trying to align what somebody understands by a biopsy from a clinical perspective and what they understand from it from an owner perspective. So really making sure, particularly I think when owners are using terminology, that we just make sure that we're using it in the same way, I think is incredibly important. And that's where I think resources like the CAM library can be so important, because actually we're then getting, we're building up knowledge on both sides, and those conversations then can be really effective. The reassurance side, when I look at Aero, we can't really deal with the explaining, the exploring and the reassurance unless we've really understood where the client's coming from, their position, and actually what the options are available to us. But once we've made sure that we've kind of shared the information, we've then got to make sure that both parties kind of have made that decision and they're in a comfortable space with it. So, yeah, we know what we're now going to do, but reassuring, checking in to make sure that they are okay with it. What have we understood? Sometimes we need to allow a bit of silence in that space as well to give people a chance to ask questions. So just be confident sometimes, and don't worry as an owner if the vet's gone quiet, and equally as a vet, allow owners to just digest and then come back with it, and making sure that before we leave the consult room, has everyone got the same understanding? Because sometimes when we're mediating, it's like a completely different consult has gone on when you talk to the two parties. So actually, how can we make sure that when we leave, we're all on the same page? And that's again around just questions, summarising, reflecting, clients reflecting about what they've understood. Right, I'm taking away from this. Am I right? Yeah. And again, for practices to make sure that's the case. And then the last bit on our Aero acronym is around owning it, and that's about again making a decision and knowing where we're going. So what's happening next? What's happening next in terms of the treatment or the diagnostics, depending on where we are. Has everybody got out of the conversation what they need? So have I got any unanswered questions? But that's my responsibility to raise those as an owner. If I've got questions, I need to be asking them rather than leaving. But that may be not just with the vet, that may be with the nurse, it may be with the front of house team. So just making sure that again I leave knowing that I've asked all my questions. What do I do if I've got worries or queries coming up before I'm next in? And also, when are we next going to be in touch with one another? So is this a case where it's you're away, come back to us when you need to? Is it a point when we are we're talking about follow up in months' time, or we're going to review in 6 months' time? But just having real clarity on what's happening next, it really helps with both the vet and the owner really buying into that decision making and knowing what's coming and having a clear understanding of it, because I think that's really, really important. And I think once we've got, ideally through a consultation, we've got a really good sharing of information, we've got a really good understanding of either what we're going to do next, what we can do next, what we are going to do next. There are times though when it doesn't quite go according to plan, and you get you get some grumbles coming through. Now, I think we very quickly allow things sometimes to escalate, either because we feel, oh, we haven't got time to deal with it now, or because we hope it might go away. I'm both from an owner perspective and from a practice team. I think anything we can do to voice those worries, those concerns, when they're at a grumble stage, rather than actually festering and becoming a complaint. So don't let it almost sort of self-fulfill its own prophecy by going down that route. Just think often people connect with people, and if there's somebody in the practice that you can speak to as an owner, just to say, I'm a bit worried about this, or I'm not really sure about it, have the confidence to do that, because that's much can be far more effective than it will be at the to deal with it further down the line. And a practice team point of view, if you've got somebody that is really good at just reassuring people, allowing them to open up, get them involved, get them to get them on the pitch, get your best players on the pitch for just helping to diffuse those situations. But if it does need to take a more formal route, I think that first contact's really important. So making sure that as an owner, if you're worried about something and you feel that you need to raise a more formal concern, make sure you're setting it out in a very constructive and very clear way. Bullet points again are great. Set why you're unhappy, what you're looking for. So is this about more information? Is it about an explanation? Do you want to discuss something further? Is there something you're expecting the practice to do to try and fix this for you? Just be really clear on that. But try not to often it takes a lot for someone to complain. It doesn't always feel like it, but it does take a lot for most of us to hit the keyboard or put pen to paper and send a complaint in. So often people will get quite emotive when they're putting that complaint down. So what I will say to people is, you write it, just stop, reflect, come back to it, and then have a read to see whether actually you're just getting across your point, and rather than it perhaps being more emotional. Being really clear on what you're unhappy about, rather than just an overview of everything that's happened. Being really clear about why you're unhappy gives the practice a really good shot at being able to understand that and then address it and come back to you. The practice need to really make sure they have got a good grasp of what it is that you're upset about or unhappy with, rather than going on a full response of everything the practice have done, all the clinical decision making, when actually it might have been about how long they've waited to pick up a prescription, or whatever it may be. It's making sure we're actually dealing with the same issues, and again making sure that the client feels they can be heard. So give them that chance to speak to you, picking up the phone, so look, help me to understand what you're unhappy about, and then what we can do about it.
Can I get you just to hold for 1 second? Sorry, hold for 1 second. I'm just going to close my door because there's noise coming through. And I also noticed that I think Sue Clark is trying to get on. Should I try and add it to the stream?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, it's okay. I'm here. I'm just listening. That's all.
Would you like to join her?
No, I'll just sit in the background if that's okay with you.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. Just wanted to check. All right, 1 second. Right, 1 second. Sorry, I could just hear that noise coming up from downstairs. Great, sorry.
Well, yeah, but I think anything we can do to stop, what is generally a grumble or perhaps a breakdown in communication escalating and becoming a complaint. Most of them, there's an opportunity to try to get it back on track and to talk to one another. And I think, there is that. What happens when a complaint escalates is that we generally forget that there's a person on the other side. We forget the worries the owner has, and we forget that the vet and the practice team are generally invested quite heavily in, trying to do the best for the animal. So the sooner we can get that conversation going again, the better chance we have of actually resolving it quickly and in a way that it sort of, damages but either party the least, really, because these are situations where we want people working together rather than it feeling in any way a them and us situation. So certainly I think, not being worried about voicing if you're concerned about something or you're unhappy with it, and from a practice point of view, taking that as an opportunity to deal with it at that point rather than it becoming a mountain further down the line. Because I think so many situations we all look back and think, oh, that's the point where we could have just had a chat at that point. And if we can try to seize those moments, then I think that's going to help everybody, in the long run. And I think from what mediation tells us is generally, the will on both sides is often exactly the same outcome. Everyone's looking for the same objective. It's just trying to make sure that we see that and standing in each other's shoes and understand, from an owner, recognizing that, I might not have voiced that, I might not have expressed it in the way I wanted to, or I might not have understood that. And then as a practice, kind of making sure that we acknowledge that we might not have explained that perhaps as well as we might have done. How can we deal with that at this point, and get the conversation going again? Really, I think that's the heart of it. As long as we're talking to one another, which I know has been incredibly difficult over the past 2 years, and when we are all incredibly busy and juggling lots of things, but the more we can do to just make sure that we are, again, sharing information, feeling confident as an owner to say, I've read about this on the can, whatever, what do you think about it? Is it an option for us? And just then knowing where your vet's coming from in terms of the plan, or them saying, okay, right, well, we can have a look at that, and exploring it. We've got to work collaboratively, and the responsibility in a longer term chronic condition management is a collective one. It doesn't sit with one side or the other. So actually, how do we keep the communication and the relationship to a place where you can do that as two adults? Okay, let's have a look at that and see what's available to us. So I suppose, Charlotte, from your perspective in practice, does that sort of reflect where you see perhaps some of the challenges sometimes, or when it works really well? Actually, it's about working together.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think communication is so important, and I have exactly seen those moments. I've had a few occasions where you see the moment where you've explained things and you think everything's fine, but something isn't right and they're not responding as you expect them to. And I recall stopping them and saying, okay, 1 second, I can tell you're not happy. I don't know why my screen's frozen, but oh well. I can tell you're not happy, and what can I help you with? Something else? There's something else going on, and then suddenly a whole other kettle of fish is open, and you suddenly get this long story. And you're like, oh, there's so much else going on in your head, and so many other things you don't know about. And that's the thing, that we see clients for 15 minutes, sometimes 20 if we're lucky. Often they don't. It's funny actually, because when you actually look back at consultations, often owners don't ask questions when probably they want to.
Yeah.
Or it is a short period of time. They don't think of those questions then. And actually is trying to keep that space open to say, if you think of something later, try and get back to us. And you're right in that it is crazy busy. We are dealing with massive staff shortages every day. To be honest, in the last, even post relaxing of rules in the last few weeks, we've struggled massively. And I can appreciate that as a massive source of frustration when people aren't getting the answers, and certainly not answers very quickly. But we are trying our best in that situation, and we do want to help. We really do. And if you ask us as a client, we do want to try and resolve your worries, and also explain why we're doing what we're doing. With chronic conditions like arthritis, the reason why there are lots of options, and we may be making some decisions which may seem odd, is because there are lots and lots of options, lots of different things we can do diagnostically and treatment wise. There is a one size fits all plan, and that's, again, like you said, why coming on here, having a look, watching some of these videos is really important, because it's all just fueling your own information and things you can then go back to your vet and say, look, I know what you're doing, but can we have a look at this? And I always appreciate that. Always, there's never a stupid question. I never ever worry about a client contacting me and saying, oh, I'm worried about this, or I've found something about this, or I've read, or I've watched this webinar, or send it in.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we might look at it and go, do you know what, actually that's, yeah, let's go down that route. Let's explain that and let's have a look at how that might help you. So I just think,
and I do think, you know, even if that is, you know, the conversation around sending something in, if actually that's not appropriate for that animal for whatever reason, again, at least you have that dialogue, and then okay, right, that's fine. We put that in the bin. We're not dealing with that. We're not thinking about that anymore. But again, I think it reassures the client that, you know, you're thinking about all the options available. And I do get, I think, from the challenge for a vet, I said assumptions are always a risk, and they're always a challenge, but you do have to find a way of getting to know the animal and the client very quickly in order to try and gauge those options. And whether it's a case of saying, well, look, you know, we can't go through every possible option here, but based on what you're saying to me, you know, these are the ones I think we should focus on. Again, it's not, this is it, this is what we're going to do. It's opening that up and saying, well, look, you know, there may be other things that we come across, it may be other things we consider, but this is where we're going to start. Because certainly I think we see, you know, a client is with one practice, something happens and they seek a second opinion. The second practice may then take a slightly different path, but they've already had, you know, options 1 to 10 at practice 1, and then they're starting from a different position and the conditions at a different stage. But from an owner, you can think, well, they got it straight away. So often, again, it's about understanding, we're starting this, we might get the right option and that might be the right pathway for now, but again, that will change as we go along. So excuse me, it is around keeping confidence with one another.
Yeah, and I find that is extremely true, and I think that's one of the reasons why, actually, rather than jumping to a conclusion that your vet has done something fundamentally wrong and they're not doing their job right and they've completely failed you, actually just please try and go back to them and talk to them, because you're right in that an awful lot of the time when we get second opinions come through or our clients transfer over to us, we actually look through the history, nothing wrong has been done, and we've probably done what we would have done anyway, and we do have that advantage of then having that information, so we ourselves start on with a bit of an advantage, and so it's like, oh, you're amazing. Well, no, actually, the other vet was on the right track, and all it may take is in a conversation to actually fix that issue. So absolutely, communication is key. And
I think it's about finding the right practice that you can have that conversation with as well. Particularly when you're looking for the long term. You know, you're not in a scenario where you're going in just for an annual checkup and vaccinations and everything's fine. You are going to have to work together. So you've got to have a good relationship and be able to have those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. I've just had a question come through. Shall I pop that up and see if we can...
Feel free.
I had a difficult situation just this week. I tried to speak to the practice manager to get some clarity on the insurance claim process, and also about having never received a client feedback questionnaire. I was instructed by reception staff that practice said I should put my complaint in an email. I was curious at what felt was a very disrespectful response.
Thanks, Elaine, for that one. I think this is more of an issue, certainly over the last 2 years, partly because of pressures within practices, just in terms of staffing levels. I think we, as clients, often we will want a conversation, and that sometimes is perceived by a practice as a complaint, and you get that, put it in writing, take it down the complaint process. We try to do work with practices to say, look, even if you do that and you then get a response, you still need to be trying to talk to one another, pick up the phone and understand really where this client's coming from, because it sounds like Elaine wanted a conversation and it's been put in the complaint category. There is a difference between ongoing dialogue and even questions and just some queries on what's happened, why, when, how, etc., and a complaint, and we can deal with, certainly from an owner perspective, it's far easier to have a conversation about what's happened and to deal with any misunderstanding compared to, as a owner, then thinking, oh, right, I've now put a complaint in, the practice is going to have to spend time responding to that complaint. That's going to probably take far longer than having that conversation with Elaine at this point. So I'd really encourage practices, if at all possible, even if it's not straight away, but say, look, we really want to pick that conversation up. It's not something I can do right now. Can we do it at this point and try and sort of book it in? Because otherwise we just channel things down a certain path and we're escalating it rather than trying to de-escalate it and understand one another. So I think my advice to Elaine would be to put something in writing to them, but keep it still very, very open, very much, these are my queries, can someone just get back to me, rather than here's my complaint. So I think, say, look, I'd really love to give feedback. I'd really love to give you some, and I'm sure there's, it's often, positive. If it's not positive, often there's a lot of really constructive stuff in there that owners will share with a practice that they can pick up on, and look to, to either just perhaps tweak what they're doing or to pick that up, those particular issues with Elaine. But I would persevere, Elaine, and I would, just put your queries to them, and encourage them to come back. But what we are saying to owners at the moment is, please be patient in terms of timescales. So, an acknowledgement within a few days would, yes, be lovely. A full response within a couple of weeks, perfect. That's not happening at the moment because there's not enough hours in the day really to do that. And I get that vets will often, and the whole team actually will be prioritizing, and there are things that have a more clinical priority above that, albeit that's really difficult, particularly when you're looking at insurance issues, because there may well be time frames that you've got to work to for the insurers. But I would persevere. And to the vets and the practice teams that come on, I think my observation, and it's not just in veterinary, it's in other sectors as well, it's often the practice that might give up on a relationship before the client does. And so just, because a client's sharing some constructive feedback or giving raising a complaint, that doesn't necessarily mean that they've lost trust and confidence in you. There might be a wobble, but actually you've got an opportunity to turn it around. And some of the I know some owners and vet practices that have amazing relationships, and that's come out of a complaint. That is the ultimate aspiration, and it's not always possible, but there are some where actually you say, well, when you talk about why they've got such a great relationship, it's that they probably went through a bit of a tough time a few years ago, but actually now they've got an amazing relationship. But that takes some doing. I know.
We haven't had any others come through, but we'll finish up. If there's anything else you'd like to add on.
No, I just started to think we've got some I've got some just real top tips, probably just to summarize before we finish for mediation. I think, and this applies equally to vets and to owners. So I think, listen well is one of my real top tips. Really you mentioned picking up on just something that's said that you think, you've not really got me, you haven't really understood it, and then respecting your gut instinct, and then picking up on that, being curious, those naive questions on both sides. Again, as you say, there's no daft question, and often that will be a really important step in really getting the most out of the consult. Our best tools are always going to be those questions, the reflection, and just empathizing with each other, so that we know we're working together. Don't be tempted always to rush in. I think as owners, it's like, I understood, yep, I've got that. Well, no. And as a practice, make sure we're giving that space that we've talked about to open up, and being really clear about what happens next. And I think that's either about picking up where you go if you've got queries or something comes to you, when you're next coming back in, whose responsibility is it then? Is it that we're going to book in an appointment in 6 weeks, or you're going to phone in if you need one? Just being really clear and making sure before you leave that consult room, everyone knows sort of what's happening next. And ultimately, just all those questions that we'd all, love to remember to ask all the time, just about, is there anything else that's worrying you? Anything that's going on? And as an owner, say it. Just, have the confidence to be able to ask that question and say it. And as a practice, just open up the space for that to happen, and deal with it as a question, not a criticism. Just then pick it up and run with it. Because if you can keep that dialogue going, as I've said constantly this evening, it will just make sure that those consults are really great, and that the best decisions are going to be made for the animal and those families involved, which has ultimately got to benefit everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. I think that's it isn't easy, and I think especially, as you said, with COVID and things that have happened, it has not been the easiest couple of years in particular. And I know personally we do get a lot of things thrown around that we're not motivated by the right reasons. The thing I hear is that we're just in it for the money and we don't really care, or we want to do all these tests just for the money reasons. In fact, there is no reason we'd ever. I mean, I'm not sure how I'm supposed to say this really, but we're not paid by commission. We don't want to do extra testing unnecessarily. we do it because we're trying to get to an answer in the end, and the right answer. And sometimes that's how we have to go.
I think for owners, understanding that different vets will take slightly different clinical decisions about what's needed, and that doesn't mean that one's right and one's wrong. Each will strike it lucky. There's obviously more science than that, but in effect, if you've got 5 options and 5 tests you can do, chances are, a percentage of the time one of them will get the answer that everyone's looking for, but the rest of the time they won't. And it's not about right and wrong. It's way more complex than that. So
definitely, there is a bit of an art to it in some respects, and that's there's so many variables to every single animal we see, and that is going to inevitably bring up issues, but we generally do care, and we really are interested in talking to people. Always really, it's some of the we've luckily got some absolutely wonderful clients at our practice, and I love it. I love that they come in and they know us and we know them really well, and often they'll pop in, they're walking past, and that just gives us that relationship that you talk about, where if something happens they're not happy, we can actually really easily talk to them and say, okay, what's gone wrong here? Let's go back a step and have a look what's gone on. Which part don't you understand? And actually, because we've got that relationship, you don't have that happen as often. When we get newer clients in, or clients we don't see very often, that's when there are more issues, because we've not been able to get to where they want to be, or there's something which is going to miss or going awry. So absolutely, just speak to us. And I think from our perspective as well, you're absolutely right. We need to listen and actually take a moment, particularly at the end of a consultation, because it's always often as they're walking out that they say the most important bit of information that we say, right, take a second. Are you happy with everything, with the plan, with what we're going to go down that route next? Is there anything else to worry about? And listening. Yeah.
I always say it's going to be far quicker to deal with it in that moment than it will be in 6 months' time, in a long letter or a long meeting, and deal with it. So picking it out, avoiding all of that is time well invested. But no, it's not easy. But if issues do crop up with your practice, if you're an owner, or if you're in a practice and there's an issue that's escalating, just know that we're here at VCMS. We'll happily talk through anonymously if there's just a particular issue you want to throw some ideas around about. How can I deal with it? I've tried this and it's probably not working. Or if you just feel that you've exhausted everything locally, you know where we are. So you can just get in touch with us, and then the team will pick it up, check through, make sure that it's one that we can deal with, and then we'll just start that conversation, and get the resolution managers involved to hold everyone's hand and try and bring everyone back together again and move it forward. So certainly I'll vetmediation.co.uk is the website. That's got our phone number, it's got an online form, and email address is on there as well. Well, certainly we can post that up shortly after the session this evening. So yeah, just reach out. Perfect. What I will see if I can, we pop it up. I will leave it up here. I'll share it on my screen. And then you can, if anyone wants to take it down. We've got social media streams going, with insight sharing activity all the time. So feel free to. There we go. Hopefully, is it up now? There we go. So yeah, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn stuff. We pop any sort of topic-based insight through. A lot of it's around communication, both for owners and for practices. But importantly, if you've got a complaint you want us to get involved in, or just a sticky situation, then phone number on there and the email address. But just get in touch.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for this evening. It's really interesting, and it's so important. Makes a massive difference to both us and the clients, because you're right, it can be one of the most stressful things to go through, taking an animal to a vet, and it's obviously very emotive, and we understand that.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
If there are any topics that from either practices or from an owner perspective that you want us to look at in another session, a particular angle, then feel free, anyone that's jumping on and watching, just to ping that over, and then we can always pick that up and do some more sort of topic specific ones in the future.
That'd be brilliant. Yeah, so if you're watching either live or in the future, pop it on the comments and someone will pick it up, and we'll try and get that for you. Yeah, thank you very much for this evening. It's been lovely having you here. It was really, really interesting, and we really, really appreciate it. So yeah, if you want any information, obviously have a look about the mediation services. If you have any concerns, or just speak to your vet if you'd like to have a chat with them about things. If you're interested, obviously you're just visiting for the first time, have a look on the description below. It will give you some more information about CAM, what we do, and we've got plenty of other videos about different things if you want to watch. I'd like to say another thank you to Big Barker for sponsoring us. They've been incredibly helpful. Have a look into them too, and I will see you all soon for another CAM Live. Thank you very much, Jenny, for having.
Thanks, Paula. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.